Well, ladies and gentlemen, the man we're joined by, Rod Picott, is coming out with a new album. It's called Out Past the Wires. It's also going to have a book of corresponding short stories. He's been called Americana of the highest order. Thank you so much for making the time to talk with us.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I appreciate the opportunity.
So, how important is it, Rod, to be real?
Oh, Jesus, the most important thing. I mean, I think everything in every art form comes from that very center of being real. You know, it it expands into all the pieces of what you do. You write about what you know, and the reader or the listener can hear if you're not being real, if you're talking about something that you don't know. It's people's detectors are sharper than I think some people think.
There's lots and lots of people, they're doing some type of job, and then they're hoping one day that they get this bliss of following what their heart desires.
Yeah.
Would you say, when you look at your past life in terms of the jobs that you had before, and then this path of being an artist, performing, recording, singer, songwriter, would you say that this life is easier?
No, it's much harder.
It's actually harder.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot more complicated because there are a lot of moving parts in being a performing artist. From making records to writing to touring to trying to get publicity. There are a lot of different pieces. It's much more complicated. When I was working in the construction world, it was very, very simple. I was good at my job. I put my 8 hours in, and I went home, and I didn't think about it. But being a performer, and particularly being a touring performer, the job never ends. I got home from Europe last night at 11 o'clock, and I was up at 6 o'clock this morning, back at work. It never ends. So it's much more complicated, and it's a much more difficult job. Yeah.
Tell us about some of your influences.
Oh, they're quite wide ranging. I was, I always feel sort of fortunate when I think about the time that I was born. I was born in 1964. So by the time I got obsessed with music, I was, 7 or 8 years old, and it was so it was such a beautiful time in music because you had all that Motown stuff, you had the R&B stuff out of Philadelphia, you had singer-songwriters like Jackson Browne and Neil Young, and so I feel fortunate to have been born when I was born. So the influences are really wide ranging. It's all that great AM pop radio when I was a little kid that I loved. I loved the soul singers. I loved Marvin Gaye and Otis Redding and those guys for whatever reason. A kid from Maine, who'd think. So those are definitely influences in terms of performance. In terms of sort of giving yourself to the performance. In terms of writing, it's a little bit different because my writing influences, as far as songwriting goes, come more from the singer-songwriter world, particularly bands that had a great songwriter. So Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and Tom Petty and even guys like Bob Seger, who I don't think gets as much credit as he should for being a great writer. He wrote some absolutely great stuff. Neil Young. So there was that sort of early period, and then later a little bit later on when I was a teenager, The Clash was a big influence. I loved how dynamic that band was, and I loved that Joe Strummer, put his politics right out in front, and later on, I suppose the influences were people who used economy of language so beautifully, like Gillian Welch and Guy Clark, and even maybe Chris Christopherson and people like that. So it's a wide range. Lucinda Williams, I love her writing is just beautiful. So it's a wide range.
So you have this new album out past the wires. What are you trying to create in the studio?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I travel solo, so there's always this sort of dichotomy between, playing the solo show, just standing there with a guitar and making a recording. With this record, we wanted to do something that was very rangy. We wanted to have real rockers on there that felt cathartic and were defiant. And we also wanted to have, sort of my stock in trade is the sort of whispery ballad.
Mm-hmm.
We set out intentionally to have a really wide range across this record, and I love I love albums that are like that, that feel like a giant collection that while it all sits together, there's a lot of different songs and different styles and different things happening on the record. As long as it hangs together.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important part of it. And so I had written a lot. I had a lot of material. I had 78 songs to pull from to make this record.
Wow. You said 78 songs.
I did, yeah. I had 78.
Goodness. It's very, very impossible, it seems, for songwriters to pick a favorite song. For example, a favorite song from an album.
Sure.
But if you had to pick a song that would represent the album, in other words, you had just one that you could present to people, which one would it be?
I would say on this record, there's a song called Little Things that is not one of the bigger tracks, but in a way, the message of the song kind of represents the record. There's a sense of trying to hold on to the gratitude, that I have, and for the place that I've been able to put myself in and work myself into, and so that's a song about just being grateful and trying to remember to be grateful, and that's a theme that runs through the record. And so I would say Little Things kind of represents the record, even though it's one of the smaller songs and there's a lot of rockers towards the front end of the record. But that theme pops up. There are two themes on the record, and one is gratitude, and the other is this sort of sense of defiance. I love artists and just people in general who fight for what they really believe in, fight for who they are. If you know what I mean. As a person and as a human being walking through the world, I love that sense in people when they fight for their place in the world. I admire it.
Tell us about the short stories.
The short stories, yeah, it was an interesting evolution. I got sort of obsessed with writing poetry, and so that was the first move towards a different kind of writing. I've been writing songs since I was about 16 or 17 years old, although I don't think I wrote a good song till I was probably 30. But so I sort of got obsessed with poetry through watching this wonderful reading of Jim Harrison, who's this great writer and great poet. And the reading was so captivating. And I sort of just started exploring that. And from there, it just felt like a natural turn towards short stories. It felt like, not that I was repeating myself, but this is my ninth studio record, and I started to wonder if I was approaching repeating myself, with using the same themes. And I wondered if I could expand on some of the characters and if there was space to do that. And so I just sort of put my hand to it and started writing, and I found it very natural and very engaging, the process of making it, trying to make a story come to fruition and sort of have that punch at the end. And it's been great fun. Yeah.
What's the greatest compliment you've received? Could be from another artist, could be a fan during one of the breaks, whatever. What's something that's really blown you away?
I can't. I could look a few up, but I can't think of anything. I can't think of anything specific off the top of my head. But it's just, I think, when somebody's moved by the work that I've done, sometimes at a show you'll see somebody profoundly moved. You'll see somebody in tears, and you just think, well, I've really done my job. I've connected with this person in one way or another. And of course, whatever's going on in their interior mind is not necessarily part of, is not something. It's something I've triggered, but it's their world that they're having an emotional response to. But it's that kind of profound connection with a person that's the most gratifying and the most moving thing. Yeah.
Anyone who travels on the road performing inevitably has some stories. I'm hoping maybe you can tell us a story about something that's happened to you.
Sure. Well, I mean, there are all kinds of things, from the guitar getting flown to a different city than the city it was supposed to fly to the great shows. When a show really comes off, it of course it's incredibly gratifying. It's sort of oddball shows that kind of stand out. I mean, I don't know if this will translate to this kind of communication, but my I had this gig a couple of years ago. They wanted me to play at this brew house, and it was at the end of a very long tour. I was out for about 6 weeks, and so my agent booked me into this brew house, and the money was good. It was one of these kind of trendy, they make their own beer kind of places, and they wanted me to play from 5 to 7 in the afternoon on a Friday. So it was just people basically coming directly from work to get drunk, at this bar from 5 to 7. And what I do is not that kind of gig, but it was, we took it for the money and to also get us from one place to another.
Hmm.
So I was playing, and the place was incredibly noisy. The 20 or so fans who showed up to really listen were having a hard time hearing me over the roar of the crowd. And at one point, while I was playing, I was in mid song, mind you. One of the waitresses came over and got right up in my face and said, "Hey, would you mind turning it down a little bit, because we can hear it all the way on the other side of the room." I just thought, okay, okay, just go put a Jimmy Buffett record on. We'll all be happier, and I'll go.
Oh, man.
Yeah, tough gig. Those are the ones that kind of stay with you because they're just so comical afterwards. They don't feel so good in the moment, but they make for good stories.
Well, do you think in this life humility is important? Or is it more important to be confident?
Wow, that's such a great question. That's a really great question, because I wrestle with that constantly. Um, I suppose, it's a combination of the two things. And it's funny that, most of the performers that I know, you have that duality going on at the same time, where, for some reason you feel like you're good enough that you deserve to stand in front of people and present the art that you make. On the other hand, you can get knocked off your little pedestal so easy, by the waitress coming over and telling you to turn it down because
Yeah.
they hear it on the other side of the room. But most performers I know, have some kind of a combination of those two things. The better performers, I think, keep a sense of humility so that they're always working. They always feel like they have to work to get better. And if you're too confident, I think you take it for granted. But of course, you have to present confidence, because then the audience has confidence in you. It's a very strange thing to be on stage. I mean, I don't know if you've ever performed as a as a songwriter or as a presenter, but to be on stage in front of people and performing is a very strange thing, because the audience always reflects back to you what you give to them. In other words, if your sense of time is solid, they feel solid. They feel trust in you. If you're confident and rolling through your stories and your songs with a lot of confidence, they feel confident in you. And at the same time, if you start to flail a little bit, or if you lose lose your momentum or lose your space. They feel that. And they feel, you know what it's like if you see a performer and you can tell that they're incredibly nervous. You feel nervous for them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very strange dynamic that happens between a performer and an audience. They absolutely reflect back to you what it is that you give them. So there are nights that are difficult where you sort of have to sort of try to present, sort of hold your breath and present a sense of confidence, even if you're not feeling confident, and that'll sometimes get you there.
Well, what has being on stage taught you?
Well, the thing that I just said has been an absolute revelation is that, and that same dynamic between an audience and a performer also holds true in basic conversation. If you feel confident and relaxed when you're speaking to somebody, they feel their confidence in you and they feel relaxed. It was absolutely a revelation because I started a little bit late in this. I came to it late, and I made my first record when I was 35, which of course is not old at all, but for starting a career in music, it's a bit old.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a few first years there where, yeah, I had to learn that lesson that of how to make an audience put their trust in you. And that was an absolute revelation to me. I didn't it was something it took me a while to understand. Yeah.
I remember one time going to see this concert. It was, I think, three total singer-songwriters performing back to back.
Mm.
And there was this one guy, and I just thought he was incredible. I just thought, wow, this guy is great. And I went out into the lobby, and I was going out to, I don't remember what I was doing, but I heard him go up to the merch guy, and he said, "How many did I sell?" And the guy said, "None." And he looked just so defeated. And I remember wishing I had money with me so I could buy a CD. Not only because I thought he was great, but just because it was so sad to hear and to
Yeah.
see him. So anytime someone is an artist, there's potential for heartbreak, you know? It's like, and not just being an artist. A lot of times people will ask me things like, well, when you send a request to interview somebody, what do they say? And I tell them, well, sometimes they don't say anything, you know? So how do you deal with rejection?
Um, well, you have to, I always, you have to have faith in what it is that you're doing. And that's what gets you through, the rejection. And you also, I think it's important to remember, what I do it's not pop music. It's not meant for everybody. It's what I'm curious about is exploring the human condition, and I'm exploring the world that I grew up in, and the sort of mentality that I grew up in. And you have to have faith that it's an interesting thing when you play to an audience. Sometimes you're playing to an audience and they don't really know you, and you're having to win them over. and and that's a very different feeling than playing to an audience who came specifically. Everybody came to hear you. It's such a joyous thing when you play a show, and you can tell that everybody's there to hear you, and they're waiting for particular songs, and that's a very different experience than trying to win an audience. And you just have to have faith. I think you have to have faith in what you're doing. You have to have faith in the skills that you've built, and you have to remember that it's not. For me, I have to remember that it's not for everybody, but there are a certain number of people that are going to respond to what it is that I do. And those are the people that I'm focused on. I'm trying to win those people who can be won over. And the rejection is hard. It's an interesting life. It's not I say the highs are very, very high and the lows are very, very low. When you have a bad gig, when you don't play well, or when you don't play well in the audience, or the audience doesn't respond to you the way that you hope, you feel really defeated, and you feel like, well, that's as good as I am until I get to play again.
Hmm.
You're only as good as your last show, and and but it's beautiful in that way, being a live performer, because you get to do it again. A couple days later or a day later, you get to do it again, and you get to regain your confidence and take another swing at it.
Would you say that there are any themes that when you're writing, they constantly go through your music?
Yeah, yeah. I touched on it earlier, but there's a theme of defiance that runs through the albums. A lot of people kid me about, and I joke myself. I call the tour the circus of misery and heartbreak. 90 minutes of bummers, one after another. Um, but you know, the themes are, finding your place in the world, and holding on to that, and that search to find a genuine place for yourself, to feel authentic walking through the world, to feel like you're living a life that is true for you, and also a sense of defiance. I've always gravitated towards. You can tell by the people that I mentioned, earlier. Talking about the Clash, and being enormously moved by you know, that kind of anger and straightforwardness. And I like people who fight for their place in the world, and that's a theme that's run through all 9 records. And it's we're all in this together, and though people can be very, very different and have very different personalities, in the end we're all struggling with the same things. We're all struggling with our own confidence to one degree or another. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
some people are enormously confident and enormously competent and have worked incredibly hard to get to that place too. But we're all struggling with the same things, and so that also runs through the records. A sense of whatever heartbreak or hardship that you've been through, you're not alone. There's other people who've suffered those same struggles, and those are a lot of times the songs that are most moving to people in the show. Yeah.
What do you hope that people say about you when you're not around?
It's funny that you asked that, because I thought that very same thing when I was on the flight home. I had that exact thought, and the answer that popped into my head was, I do not care. I want to experience I want to experience the rest of my life fully and intentionally. And I want to have interactions with people that are meaningful. And I want to continue to explore the human condition in both its light and dark phases. And that's what I'm interested in. You know, I mean, you can name the most famous person in the world right now, and 100 years from now, they'll be gone, and nobody people will barely remember them. Of course, we have, all these kind of recordings and different sort of media, collections to look back on now that you didn't have 100 years ago or 150 years ago. But I don't really care. I want to, I'm not trying to I'm not trying to live, I'm not trying to leave a legacy, and I don't really think about that. I'm thinking about the next gig. I play Friday night in St. Louis, and that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about whoever shows up to that gig. I want to give them the best, most honest show that I can possibly give them. And the same with the books, I want to write stories that move people, that are meaningful to people, that they see themselves reflected in, whether they be dark or light. So
You don't ever think about some guy, some kid, or whoever, 100 years from now, perhaps, listening to one of your songs?
I don't. I really don't. No, I don't. I
Hmm.
don't think about it. I have a very small career with an incredibly loyal audience. The loyalty that my audience has for me is really moving to me, and the support that I get. I mean, people leap to help me do the thing that I do, whether it's monetarily or, housing me or, you know, in, offering to help with all kinds of different ways, endless list of different ways. And I just feel an enormous gratitude. I did construction for 18 years. I was hanging and finishing sheetrock for 18 years. 18 really hard, miserable years. And not to say that I was miserable the entire time, but that is a really, really hard job. And, I wasn't exactly built for it mentally. I had to sort of learn how to be tough, how to handle myself on the job. Some of the companies that I worked for were rougher than others, and it can be a rough world there. And so I never felt fully at home. I always felt like I had one foot in one world and one foot in the other world.
Hmm.
So to have both feet in this world now, I'm just enormously grateful. It's incredible to me that I get to make a living doing this.
Having the perspective that you do, what is the best thing about being Rod Picott?
Um, just I think having an audience, having an ear out there in the world after all those years of working towards it slowly, methodically, and coming from a place where I didn't have a lot of natural talent. It took me years to find my voice as a singer. It took me years to find my voice as a writer. Just to know that there's an audience out there, whatever size it is, that's waiting and interested in what I have to offer is an amazing thing. That's an amazing thing to me when I think about it.
How do you define Rod Picott?
I'm a hammer. I'm a hammer. I'm a workhorse. You know. That's what I would say. And if you would ask anybody, any of my close friends, they would say the same thing. And like I said earlier, I got home at 11 o'clock last night, and I was up at 6 and working at 7. So I never stop working. I absolutely love it. I'm engaged by it. I'm engaged by all the pieces of it. Not just the writing, not just the playing, not just the shows, but, making my list and working through the things that need to be done. I find it all very, 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 very satisfying. So yeah, I'm a hammer.
You're inspiring.
Oh, that's a nice thing to say. That's a nice thing to say. Thank you, Paul.
You have the microphone here, and what I mean by that is, in closing, I would just let you say whatever you want to our audience, wherever they might be.
Right. Well, I would just say, if you, I would say you, in terms of, I guess the thing that jumps into my mind is to just, I think that people should try to live the life that they authentically feel inside, and that, the world is a big enough place to hold, anybody's dreams and anybody's desires. And, I also think too it's important to surround yourself with people that make you feel capable of doing the things that you want to do. That's very important. You can be dragged down by people who can make you feel smaller, and I think that it's important to be surrounded by people who make you feel bigger and make you feel competent and make you feel capable of doing the things that you want to do in life. Whether they're small things like growing some tomatoes in your backyard, or whether they're making a piece of art. I think that that's an important thing.
I didn't warn you about this, and do not feel any pressure from me. No pressure whatsoever. But would you like to play a song for our listeners?
Oh, sure. I'd have to tune my guitar. My guitar is all detuned because I just got off the airplane. Okay. orphan child, foster kid, richer baby than Captain Kidd. Gold chains hang from the smile I hid, laughing at all the damage I did. Dirt and charcoal, powder and dust. Come on, baby, who you gonna trust when the frame is turned to rust? And there's no time left for us. Nobody's waiting at the door. Down to the bone, down to the bone. I'm gonna love you down to the bone. When all the mockingbirds have flown, baby, down to the bone. Devil had a song he hissed. Baby had a boy she kissed. Chet Baker had a coat like this. He made his lover cry and moan. So wear your silver, wear your gold. Won't mean a thing when you're down and cold. When your souvenirs get sold and your bedtime story is told, the heads bow and the hands fold. Down to the bone, down to the bone. I'm gonna love you down to the bone. When all the mockingbirds have flown, baby, down to the bone. It's rain on the blacktop, rain on your face. It's raining all over this goddamn place. It's trying to wash away the very last trace of all your summer beauty and grace. So when the matchstick starts to flicker in the bag of seeds is sown, I hope I'm still a glimmer in your eye when I'm dead and gone, and I'm on my way home. Down to the bone, down to the bone. I'm gonna love you down to the bone. And all the mockingbirds have flown, baby, down to the bone. That crack in my voice was the 24 hours I was awake.
You did great.
Thank you.
Very captivating. Well, Rod, thank you very much for making the time to do this. Thanks for talking with us. Thanks for playing us a song. It was wonderful.
I thank you, Paul. I'm enormously grateful. I know there's only so much room. There's only so many people you can talk to. So I'm enormously grateful. And it was a great conversation. You had great questions. Really, really, really tops. Yeah. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So all the listeners can visit rodpicott.com. I'm going to spell the last name Piccott, and they can find out all about you and get more involved.
Yeah, all the tour dates are up there, and there are some videos that are easy to find if you want to just kind of check it out and see if it's your kind of thing. And yeah, everything's out there on the website. You can even, if you want to get on the email list, you can do that, and you get a free download. A song downloads right to your computer, and it's a good, very simple website, but it works well. So,
Rod, I'm shaking your hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Happy trails.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.